Okay. So yes, this is our topic tonight. Will World War III start in the Ukraine? And with a few introductory remarks from President Putin, he said back in 2014, he said that Russia is preparing for World War III. Ron Paul, who is a US senator, said the USA has already declared war on Russia. And Pope Francis helps us to understand why Ron Paul would say something like that. He says that World War III is coming piecemeal, meaning a little bit at a time. It's building to a climax. And some people even say that World War III started with 9/11 and the consequent war on terror. And perhaps that's why Pope Francis said it's coming piecemeal. And I'd also like to ask this question. Why are the super rich looking for safe havens to flee to, such as New Zealand, where I come from? It's getting to be a common thing for super rich Americans going down to New Zealand and building themselves an apocalyptic bunker to shelter in. And if they don't go to New Zealand, they go to places in the US where they can buy a silo, which was used to, house nuclear rockets. And some of them have become superfluous, and they're converting them into living quarters for rich billionaires to shelter in when the apocalypse comes. So people are thinking about this, and very important people are saying that it's coming soon. But what I'd like to do is to go into a little bit of background. You will remember my illustration about the tectonic plates rubbing up against each other, and when they cause a lot of friction, and they cause earthquakes. And the same thing happens in the geopolitical sphere. Here is two tectonic plates rubbing up against each other, where one called the other a killer with no soul. Biden called Putin a killer with no soul. Now, in diplomatic terms, you just don't say things like that. As a consequence, Biden has no regrets about calling Putin a killer, says the White House. Tensions rise as president refuses to back down, and Russian leader menacingly wishes him good health on state TV. Well, that wasn't the end of the matter. The Russians called their ambassador home from Washington, D.C. And then Biden called Putin and suggested that they have a summit meeting at a neutral ground. And it was suggested Vienna in Austria. Putin said, no, thanks. I don't want to talk to you. But he must have had second thoughts, because then he suggested that Biden and himself go on the internet and debate each other. And Biden said, no, thank you. I don't want to do that. And what happened next? Well, the United States decided that they wanted to send some warships into the Black Sea in support of the Ukraine, of the events that are taking place there, because tensions are rising, as you all know, on the border between the independent republics, if you want to call them that, and the official Ukrainian government. And then Biden decides then that he's going to place sanctions on Russia. So he puts the sanctions on Russia, and he says the reason why we're going to place these sanctions on Russia is because Russia has been bribing the Taliban in Afghanistan to kill American soldiers. In other words, they place a bounty on each soldier the Taliban kills. Well, on the very same day, the American intelligence agencies said that this was a bogus story on the very same day. So things are getting strange. It seems to me that there is a bit of a fight going on in the American administration about how to deal with Russia, how to deal with Ukraine, how to avoid World War III. Then the Russians said, if you send those ships into the Black Sea, well, good luck. Don't come near our coasts. And America said, well, we're not going to send any ships. They decided, all right, we won't send them. And then Britain stepped in and said, all right, if America's not going to send any ships and challenge the Russians and support the Ukrainians, then we will do it. And so then the Russians suggested to the American ambassador that he ought to go back to America. And they didn't actually declare him persona non grata, which means kick him out. But suggesting that he go home is virtually next to kicking him out of the country. So here we have the situation where we have these two nuclear armed powers facing off with one another, and they're not communicating with each other. They don't trust one another. And this is looking a little grim for the health of the whole world. The next thing that happened was Russia arrests two alleged Belarus plotters. And I think this statement says it's alleged that there was a plot to assassinate the president of Belarus. His name is Lukashenko. You may remember that there were protests last year trying to overthrow Lukashenko. Well, this is probably a genuine plot because Putin mentioned it in his address to the Russian parliament, which I don't think he would do that if it was a bogus story. And apparently there's going to be a trial and these people are going to be exposed. So it seems that there is a lot going on in that part of the world. I don't know whether you realize it, but Belarus is a country between Ukraine and Russia and the Baltic states. And it's sort of trying to, keep itself independent, but it's very difficult for these countries on the Russian border to remain independent. They're getting pulled. America is trying to pull them into NATO, and Russia is trying to avoid them joining NATO. So they're between a rock and a hard place. So to understand this further, we need to go back into some history. Now, the New York Times, back in the year 2003, published an interesting story. They said, American empire, get used to it. That was like, we're number one, get used to it. This is just after 9/11, as you know. And so America is feeling very bruised, and they're going to now flex their power. And what many people don't realize, America has been an empire for a long time. It's just a different kind of empire from what we're used to when we study history. Today, America is no mere superpower or hegemon, but a full-blown empire in the Roman and British sense. No country has been as dominant culturally, economically, technologically, and militarily in the history of the world since the Roman Empire. Here are some books. Many people agree that America is an empire. I also believe it's how you have the the woman riding the beast, and the beast has 7 heads. And we as Adventists believe that those 7 heads are 7 empires. And most, perhaps not all, most Seventh-day Adventists believe that the 7th head is the United States of America. And this book here, on the side here, it says the American Empire, Commonwealth of God. And this one here on the bottom here, Holy American Empire. So these people, these authors of these books, see a connection between their political empire and religion. And here's some more. The New American Empire, the secret history of the American Empire, and the rise and fall of the American Empire. Some people already, some academic people who study these things, they believe that the American Empire is already in decline. And a decline of an empire usually takes a long time. The Roman Empire took nearly 200 years to fall, and the British Empire took many years to fall too. But some things can come together which make empires fall quickly as well. But America is being challenged. And what we have to realize is that the strength of the American Empire, the main pillar in the American Empire is the monetary system that we have in the world today. The American dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and that gives America enormous power, absolutely enormous power. America can't sanction countries if it didn't have that power over the reserve currency of the world. Sanctions wouldn't mean much without that. The US military has about 800 bases around the world. And that's what an empire needs. This is the definition of an empire, to have overseas military bases. Putin once said, we are surrounded by United States military bases, and we're supposed to be the bad guys. And as you know, the prophecy about the American Empire says he had 2 horns like a lamb and he spake as a dragon. Now, this is going to be a very controversial little topic here, because we have to ask the question, is America speaking like a dragon today, now? And many Seventh-day Adventists who are American will say no. But if you ask somebody who's not American, they will often say yes. Let me give you an example. If you were to ask a Native American, for example, is America speaking like a dragon? What do you think he would say? If you were to ask a Filipino, when America took over the Philippines, they killed 500,000 Filipinos. That's where they started waterboarding, by the way. What do you think he would say? This is a question which, of course, as I say, is controversial, because many Seventh-day Adventists think that America will not speak like a dragon until the Sunday law. But it's an empire, and empires do nasty things to keep their empire. So let's just leave it at that. But let me just show you one thing. This will help you to understand what empires do. The CIA's secret army. This is a Time magazine article which lets the cat out of the bag in many stories, particularly about the coup in Iran. In Operation Ajax, CIA officers in Iran engineer a coup against Premier Mohammad Mossadegh, restoring Shah Reza Pahlavi to the throne. The agency's role soon became widely known. That's possibly why they are admitting it in this Time article, because it certainly became widely known. This has a long, Iran would not be the country it is today if this never happened. Let's put it that way. It's Premier Mohab Mossadegh was democratically elected to lead the country, but because he wanted to nationalize the oil industry for the benefit of the Iranian people, they conducted a coup against him and restored the Shah of Iran, and he was an American puppet who did what he was told. And that's why you have the extreme regime in Iran at the moment, because the Iranians turned to religion and they used the religion to overthrow the Shah. And now you have that autocratic Iranian regime in Iran at the moment. This is something that America does on a regular basis around the world. And they usually do it whenever a country wants to maintain its independence and keep its resources to itself for the benefit of its own people. That's when they get overthrown. And the Ukrainian situation is slightly different because it's a strategic country, which is why America is so interested in it. So what does the empire want? Well, they want this. See that? That's called the Earth Island. That's the biggest piece of land in the world. It's called Eurasia, Europe and Asia combined, and it has about 70% of the world's resources. And that is what is the key to ruling the world. Who rules Eastern Europe? Rules the heartland. Who rules the heartland? Rules the world. This is a statement from Halford Mackinder, who was the British brains, if you like, behind geopolitics. He was the one who put the information together to keep the British Empire together. Because let me just explain first that this is the heartland. And if you control this part of the world, according to the geopolitical doctrine, if you control this part, then you can control every other part of Eurasia. Africa doesn't matter because it's got no power. This is even though it's connected to the Eurasian island, it's got no power. So Africa doesn't matter, but the rest of this continent does. So if you control the center, then you can control all the rim of the continent as well. And this is what those who practice geopolitics believe. And this is why America is so interested in this part of the world. And it just so happens that most of this part of the world is Russia. And that's why Russia is always demonized, because Russia is the problem. Russia will not get out of the way. Russia will not let America in here. And America has to get in here because it cannot be the power that it wants to be without controlling this. It's not just about America, it's about globalism. Globalism is a doctrine which many powerful people hold, including the Roman Catholic Church, and they are stymied because Russia will not accept their globalist doctrine. And the same with China over here. They won't accept it either. China for the Chinese, Russia for the Russians. That's what they believe. They're nationalists. That's what Trump also was. That's why they had to get rid of him. He was a nationalist. He wasn't a globalist. But the Catholic Church is behind this, and because they're the globalists, they're the ones who are going to benefit the most from globalism, and this is what prophecy tells us in the book of Revelation. And there is Ukraine here. I don't know whether you can. Ukraine is right up touching the heartland. And that's why Ukraine is so interesting. These countries here on the rim, they are all part of NATO. Down here, Turkey is part of NATO. The only countries that are not part of NATO are these little countries in the Caucasus. That's why we had so much trouble in Georgia some years ago. They were trying to get Georgia into NATO, and Russia said no. And that's why Ukraine is so interesting, because America wants to get Ukraine into NATO. Okay? So let's carry on. The other nightmare which America is facing is this initiative from China called the Belt and Road Initiative, where they're going to connect the whole of Eurasia by high-speed railways and sea lanes. And what that means is that all the goods and services that are going to be bought and sold are going to travel across land and not the sea. This is a nightmare for all those who believe in globalism, because these two nationalistic countries, China and Russia, are going to be the powers behind this. And it's all going to operate on local currencies and not with American dollars. So this is the great challenge that America is facing. If this piece of land here, this huge chunk of land, actually unites economically, which means also a little bit politically, this is going to destroy the American empire. And what it is a challenge in many ways. And this is another one. We've talked about this before. Nord Stream 2 is connecting Russia to Germany, which is a NATO country. And this is absolutely anathema to America, because they don't want their NATO puppets to be connected in any way to Russia. This creates an economic connection, creates a political connection. And this is a challenge to American hegemony. That's why we care so much about, I'm not sure if you do or not, but anyway, in certain places, if you listen carefully, you'll hear lots of screaming about Nord Stream 2, about this gas pipeline, which is going to supply gas to Germany and to Europe as a whole. So it's nearly completed. It's going to be completed this year. And America has been moving heaven and earth to try and stop it. But they haven't managed so far, which means that the power of America is weakening. And what this all adds up to is a battle between sea power and land power. And this is quite a complex subject, but Britain used to be the sea power, and Britain was the one who contained this piece of land, which is so dangerous to the sea powers. If it ever connects itself, then all, as I say, goods and services will be moved by land, not by sea. Britain's empire became wealthy and was totally dependent on the control of the sea. That's why Britain had such a powerful navy. And what they did was they controlled the coast of this heartland. They controlled all the ports. That's why they had wars against China to control the coast of China. All trade with China had to go through ports controlled by Britain. They also built up the navy of Japan in order to defeat Russia. Russia sent their navy over here to this part of the world, and the Japanese navy destroyed it. That Japanese navy was built by Britain. They built it to contain Russia. And of course, they suffered the consequences, because Japan became a mighty power in its own accord, and they eventually went to war with Britain and America. This is anyway, we're getting off the topic. So America is now the sea power, and that's why it has a huge navy. It has something like 10 battle groups built around an aircraft carrier and all the support ships. They've got about 10 of them, I think, maybe 12. And so they deploy this Navy all over the world in order to control the sea lanes. They do exactly what Britain used to do. But the most important piece of sea in the world is this piece here. I don't know whether you're good at looking at maps, but this goes back to the Constantinople when Constantine left Rome and built his new capital here called Constantinople. And he built it here because this is such a strategic place on the part in the world. This is the Straits of Bosporus, which goes into the Black Sea and through the Sea of Marmara and out the Straits of Dardanelles, through the Mediterranean and to the Atlantic. This is what Russia has always wanted. Russia has always wanted control over this part of the world so that they can escape the confines of, even though they are in a huge country, they have no ice-free ports, which is a huge problem for Russia. And so they've always wanted to capture this part of the world here so that they can escape out of the Black Sea into the Mediterranean and out into the Atlantic. Britain went to war on several occasions to prevent Russia from capturing this. They're quite, the Crimean War, for example, back in the 18th century. No, 19th century. And they're quite happy. Both America and Britain are quite happy that Turkey controls this because Turkey is a puppet in the NATO system. And technically, Turkey is under their control. And so Russia has always found itself bottled up as far as a navy goes. And that was what Britain always wanted. And that's what America also wants, to keep Russia bottled up. That's why they have military bases all around, and they don't want the Russian Navy to get access through here and control this area. So this is all background to what's happening in Ukraine. So let's go to Ukraine now. Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych was democratically elected in 2010, and he lasted for 4 years. The problem was that it's between Europe, between the EU and Russia. And there was a tug of war between the EU and NATO and Russia about who was going to dominate the Ukraine, or who Ukraine wanted to join. And this is a red line for Russia. Russia will never allow Ukraine to be a part of NATO, because that means that they're going to have American missiles situated in Ukraine pointed directly at Russia. And they're only going to have about a 10-minute warning or something like that to do something about it when the missiles start flying. And that's something that Russia will never tolerate. And it's actually a red line. Putin actually, just recently, a couple of days ago, he gave his annual speech to the Russian parliament. And he actually used the term red line. And they've never used that word before, never. First time Russia has ever used the term red lines. And one of the red lines was, there's only 2 red lines for Russia: don't interfere in our internal affairs, and don't interfere in the countries on our border. Okay, so a red line is supposed to be, if you cross over this, that means war. So this is why Ukraine has become such a hotspot. It's because Yanukovych decided that he didn't want to join the EU. And the reason why he didn't want to join the EU is because he couldn't get a decent deal from the EU. that's that was sorry, we're going to go back. That's why the protests started. When Yankovic decided, no, I'm not going to join the EU, that meant that he was going to go with Russia. He didn't actually say he was going to go with Russia, but that's what it meant. And so that's when the protests started. And you have these are professional protesters. They're agent provocateurs. They get paid. They get paid to do what they do. This is how they operate. They provoke the police. They want the police to react violently, and then they can blame the police and stoke up the action. People, they can blame the police for anybody who dies, for example, and people did die. Now, I want you to understand something about Ukraine. Ukraine is a very interesting place with a very interesting history. Not a good history. They've suffered. The people in Ukraine have suffered enormously, probably more than most people in Europe. I mean, just one thing: Stalin starved the Ukrainian people. Ukraine is the great breadbasket of Europe. It produces enormous amounts of wheat, but Stalin took all the food and let the Ukrainians starve. About 6 million of them died at least. It's called the Holodomor, I think, something like that in Ukrainian. And so and then they had the Second World War to endure as well. So these people have suffered a lot. So they've become very politicized. Okay. Now this man here is this is the people protesting in Kiev, and they hold this man's head up high. This man is a hero to them. Here he is again. His name is Stefan Bandera, and he was a Ukrainian nationalist leader, convicted terrorist, and Nazi collaborator in World War II. Now, depending on where you come from in Ukraine, you will dispute that. see, to these people, he's a hero. And the reason why he's a hero is because he fought the Russians with the Germans. The history of the Galician division of the Waffen-SS. Now, Galicia is a part of Ukraine. It's in the western part of Ukraine. And what Stefan Bandera did is he helped the Germans to organize a division of Ukrainians to fight in the Waffen-SS, not just normal German army, but SS, the worst of the worst. And they fought the they fought the Russians, and that's why he is considered a hero. So whenever you have problems with the Russians, the Ukrainians always bring out Stefan Bandera, even though he's dead now. He was a convicted terrorist. This part of Ukraine is where you find Galicia. Now, they're called Galicia, the Galician SS division, for a reason, because almost all of the people who joined that division to fight for the Germans against the Russians came from Galicia. And what's so interesting about Galicia is that's where the Catholic part of Ukraine is. Now, it's a special kind of Catholic church. It's a Greek Orthodox Catholic church, and sometimes it's called the Uniate Church. And it's a Catholic church which follows Greek Orthodox customs, but it acknowledges the Pope's supremacy. And so almost all of those soldiers who joined came from the Catholic Church in Galicia. Here you have, this is a picture of the leaders of the Galicia and the leaders of the Galician division. And all of these men are volunteers that are going to join the division, and they are going into a church. They're going into a Catholic church in order to enroll in this division. And they have an interesting history. They, as you know, the Germans lost the war, and the Galician regiment or division got pushed westward. They ended up in Austria in a British prisoner of war camp. Now, part of the agreements that the Allies made after the Second World War was that all the people who came from Russia or Ukraine, they all had to return to where they came from. And the Allies agreed to send everybody back to Russia or to Ukraine that they had in their custody in their POW camps, which meant they were sending these people to death. As soon as because the communist authorities in Russia considered these people traitors, most of them, and especially these people who fought for the Germans. So this actually happened. It was called Operation Keelhaul, and they forced all these people who didn't want to go back to Russia or didn't want to go back to Ukraine. They forced them into transports and took them back and dumped them there, and the communist authorities killed most of them. The only people who escaped were the Galician division. They were allowed to go to Britain, and from Britain, most of them were settled in Canada. Now, who pulled the strings to make that happen, I wonder? That's a very interesting little historical note there. Anyway, these are the Ukrainian people in Galicia. They're all Catholics, and they're marching in the street in support of their Galician division. There they are again. This woman here is giving the Nazi salute, and they are in great admiration and support for their boys. They're still doing it today. This is the Galician symbol, and it's also the symbol that the Galician division used when they went to fight the Russians. They're still marching in support of that division today. This is Oli Tannebrook, leader of the Svoboda Party, formerly known as the Social National Party of Ukraine. He's giving the Nazi salute. He comes from Galicia. He's a Catholic. This is the right sector. They are a group of nationalist political. This is what the Wikipedia says about them. It's a Ukrainian nationalist political party that originated in November 2013, just before the coup in Kiev, as a paramilitary confederation at the Euromaidan protests in Kiev, where its street fighters led counterattacks against riot police. They are right-wing Nazis. Now, during the actual demonstrations in Kiev, which resulted in the overthrow of the government, you have these Catholic priests everywhere. They're everywhere during the demonstration. They are infested with priests. There are, I know most of them would have been there for genuine religious reasons. Most of them would have been there trying to keep the peace, I think. I'm sure they were, but not all were. Here's a priest throwing a rubber tire. Now, why is he throwing a rubber tire? Because that's what they did. They threw rubber tires at the police and set them on fire. So the priests were very much behind the coup, which brought down the government. And most of these priests, many of them were from that Catholic area, Catholic priests. Now, you may have heard of the demonstrations last year in Belarus as well, where they tried to bring down the president called Lushenko. And it was a near run thing. He managed to maintain onto power, and mostly because he got support from Russia. Here are priests leading the people into the demonstrations. This man is holding a cross. These are obviously priests. They take the leading role in most of these demonstrations. It's not just a political and an economic battle that's going on here. It's a religious war. Ukraine is where the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church meet. It's one of the boundary areas where the Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox or Russian Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox, where they meet and rub shoulders and battle each other. So this is a description of how Ukraine is divided politically and culturally, but it should also add religiously. So in the West here, you have the Ukrainian-speaking pro-West Catholic. It's not all Catholic. It's mostly just the western tip of this blue area, which is Catholic, but they're very influential. So this is pro-Western, Ukrainian-speaking, nationalistic, and over here, this is the Russian-speaking, Orthodox, and pro-Russian. These people in the West here, they fought for Germany against the Russians in the Second World War. These people in the East here, they fought for Russia against the Germans in the Second World War. And now you have both of them in one country. So you can imagine that the people in the East, when the Nazi regime, because that's what it is, when the Nazi regime took over in Ukraine, they said, no, thank you. This is a sign. I think this is a sign into the Crimea. Notice what it said. We don't want this. This is a map of Ukraine. Oh, sorry, it's a map of Crimea. And it says, we don't want this here. We want that. This is a Nazi symbol, the swastika. We don't want that here. We want this. And that's Russia. That's the Russian flag. And I've explained before, Ukraine only received Crimea because Khrushchev, when he was premier in the Soviet Union, gave it to Ukraine. It always used to be Russian. Russian people live there. Russian people, it's a language they speak there. And so, yeah, why he gave it to Ukraine, we don't know for sure, but he did that. And Ukraine only had it for a few years. And when this new regime took over in Ukraine, they said, no, thanks. We want to be Russian again. Now, this is something which is not very well known, but the demonstrations or the coup succeeded because they brought in snipers to shoot at both the demonstrators and the police. And that's how they managed to rile up everybody. The police got mad, the people got mad, and it just turned into a huge mess, and the government fell. Now, how do we know this is true? It's because the snipers themselves, they were all Georgians. They were brought in from Georgia. And the snipers themselves never got paid. They never knew exactly why they were going there. They never knew what they were going to do when they were there until they were actually ordered to start shooting. And we know this because 6 of them are dead already, and the others that have survived are scared, And so they started talking, and they started talking to an Italian who made a documentary about it. And by making their story public, they're hoping that they're going to protect themselves and that they won't also die. So we also know it because a phone call was recorded between these two politicians. One is from the EU and this one is from Estonia. And they actually talked about the snipers who were shooting at everybody on their phone call. It was recorded and then it was leaked. Okay. So this actually happened. This is the terrible way that coups are performed. Now, this head of Stratfor, which is a company that's often called the private CIA, because they do stuff that the CIA won't even do, he says the overthrow of Yankovic was the most blatant coup in history. And he said that on a Russian media outlet. And that's why we don't hear much about that in the Western media. In fact, this is a story which would be buried and never mentioned. But this man is a subcontractor for the CIA, and possibly he was involved. He didn't admit to that, but he did say, we know for sure that this was the most blatant coup against a democratically elected government in history. So now Putin is going to react to all these things which has happened. So back in the year 2014, he gave a speech. And the name of the speech was The World Order, New Rules or a Game Without Rules. And this is where he's going to set out his reaction to what has happened in the Ukraine and around the world. He says that he is going to prepare for World War III. And in this statement, we're going to read a little bit here. I hope you don't mind, because it's very interesting. In her, he means Russia, external and even more so internal politics, Russia's power will rely not on the elites and their backroom dealing, but on the will of the people. So here he's saying straight off the bat, I'm not a globalist. I'm here for the Russian people. I'm here for the interests of the Russian people. I'm not interested in the games that you're playing in order to create a one world government. And this is why he's a target for these people. He's demonized up, right, left, and center. When they demonize somebody, they fully intend to destroy them. Because when they're destroyed, the people have been convinced that this man is a demon and he deserves everything that he gets. But Putin is a Russian nationalist, and he is not interested in global games. Russia will not attempt to reformat the world in her own image, but neither will she allow anyone to reformat her in their image. Russia will not close herself off from the world, but anyone who tries to close her off from the world will be sure to reap a whirlwind. All systems of global collective security now lie in ruins. What he means by that is there are no treaties that bind the nations together to behave themselves. They're all gone. That's what he means by the new world order with no rules. There are no rules to that nations follow anymore. This is why we're living in such a dangerous time. Yeah. Okay, carrying on. There are no longer any international security guarantees at all. And the entity that destroyed them has a name, the United States of America. This is obviously from a Russian point of view. Take it with a pinch of salt if you want to, but this is the Russian point of view. Russia has no intention of going fishing in the murky waters created by America's ever-expanding empire of chaos, and has no interest in building a new empire of her own. This is unnecessary. Russia's challenges lie in developing her already vast territory. Neither is Russia willing to act as a savior of the world as she had in the past. And he's referring to the role they played in World War II. Russia does not wish for the chaos to spread, does not want war, and has no intention of starting one. However, today Russia sees the outbreak of global war as almost inevitable, is prepared for it, and is continuing to prepare for it. Russia does not want war, nor does she fear it. And this is back in 2014, and Russia has become much more powerful since then. And he also said the US has no plans to humiliate Russia, but instead wants to subdue it. No one has ever succeeded in doing so and never will. So that's how Russia feels. So what happened in the Ukraine? Well, as you know, the people in the East decided that they were going to leave Ukraine and start their own republics. And so there was a war, and Ukraine lost the war. And so what do you do now? Well, these four got together. This is Putin, of course. This is Angela Merkel. This is the president of France, Hollande. And this is Pukashi. I can't remember his name. Sorry. Can't remember. He was the leader of Ukraine, but he's not anymore. Okay. So they put together what they called the Minsk Accord, and they were supposed to, Ukraine was supposed to abide by this agreement and talk to the leaders of the breakaway republics and create a peace treaty. But Ukraine never did. They never did talk to these republics, and it's never happened. In the meantime, Assad in Syria asked Russia to intervene and come help them against ISIS. And with a few planes and a few other military means, Russia basically destroyed ISIS. And that's why they got a big thank you from the Syrian people. ISIS was a terrible thing. I'm sure you remember what they did. They used to cut people's heads off and do all sorts of awful things. And nobody seemed to be able to stop them, but Russia did. And they stopped them with just a small military contingent. And it's very important to realize that they were there because they were invited to be there by the legitimate government of Syria. And everybody else who was involved in that conflict was there as aggressors and invaders. This was not a civil war. This seriously was not a civil war. This was an invasion of Syria by outside forces. America's response was, Clinton tells friends of Syria, Russia and China will pay a big price because China was supporting Russia. So the Americans were not happy. The empire was not happy. You know, I would like to make a big distinction between American people and the people who run the empire. Most American people have no idea that they are in an empire, but the leaders of America are deceiving the American people about the true nature of what they are doing overseas. But at the same time, all American people benefit from the empire. You know what basically what the American empire does is they send dollars out into the world to be used by the world. And in return, they get goods and services which people send them. And that's how the dollars come back to America. So there is a clear advantage for every American to belong to an empire, just like there was when the Romans had an empire and the British had an empire, because every empire exploits the rest of the world to the advantage of the homeland. So the rest of the world is never very happy about it, though. Now, what happens next is that instead of talking to the leaders of the republics that broke away, the new president, Zelensky, he signs a decree saying that Ukraine intends to recapture the Crimea and recapture the breakaway republics. And of course, this is really a declaration against Russia. It's a declaration of war against Russia. And so by disguise. So what Russia does is they rush all their military forces to the border, huge amounts of military force, something which perhaps America and, oh, by the way, Zelensky was encouraged to do this by you know who, and this was a bit of a shock for everybody. So they had to pause and think, what do we do now? So Ukraine is now in a terrible situation. They can't go forward. They can't really attack and try and gain this territory because obviously Russia is going to attack them and they are going to be defeated. Enormous. The Russians have actually said, they said, don't attack or Ukraine will be destroyed. And maybe that hasn't been reported in the media that much either, but that's the legitimate reaction of Russia. If you attack Crimea or these republics, you will be destroyed. But at the same time, the leaders in Ukraine can't really go back either. They can't withdraw because if they do, all the nationalist forces in Ukraine are going to be so upset. There's going to be enormous trouble in Ukraine. The government will probably fall and there'll be chaos. So they're between a rock and a hard place. And so everybody is desperately trying to find a way out of this dilemma for the Ukraine. They have to find a face-saving device to withdraw without withdrawing, which is very difficult to do. But this is what their next meeting was about. It was in Paris. So here you have the new French leader, Macron. Here you have Zelensky. He's not looking very happy at all. But they're trying to find a way out of the problem, out of the dilemma. This is where we are now. We've come up to today. This is where the world is sitting at the moment, looking what's going to happen next. And this is why maybe World War III will break out in Ukraine. Zelensky has asked, this is Zelensky here, he's the president of Ukraine. He has asked Putin to meet him personally, but Putin has refused. So here we have, this is what we are left with. Basically, it's a fight between Russia and America. Ukraine is the meat in the sandwich, squeezed between the two. If there is a fight, it's not Russia that's going to be destroyed, and it's not America that's going to be destroyed, it's Ukraine. But it might escalate from there. So this is where we're faced. This is what we're looking at as a world community. And everybody is trying to figure out the next step. Nobody wants to actually see a war. Even America has backed down. They decided not to send their navy into the Black Sea, etc. They've backed down from protesting about the Nord Stream 2. But there are forces that are still trying to get this war started. And the problem with America is it's a divided administration. Some people are for peace and others are for war. And it's the same situation in Ukraine. It just depends which party is going to prevail, the war party in America and Ukraine or the peace party. But still, Ukraine has to find a way out of this dilemma. Otherwise, it's going to cause chaos in Ukraine. So that's where we are at the moment. It's going to be interesting to see how things develop in the future. I just thought you should know. And I think it's important to understand some of this background information. There's a lot more that could be said, but I think that's enough to understand how we got into this situation and why we are into this situation and where it goes from here. I don't know, but I do know one thing, and that is prophecy. I keep saying prophecy tells us that America comes out as the prominent power in the last days. It becomes, prophecy says it's going to be the chief supporter of the Roman Catholic system and force the world to worship the beast, etc., etc. So obviously, even though America is challenged in many places in the world at the moment, somehow it pulls through and gains the supremacy. But that, I think, can only come with the support of the Roman Catholic Church, because the two of them, prophecy tells us that the two of them work together in the interests of the enemy against God's people. So it's going to be interesting to see how this thing unfolds. Keep your eyes on Ukraine, but most important, keep your eyes on Jesus, because he's the only solution in the end. May God bless you as you consider what we've seen, and maybe we can turn it back to Eva to have some discussion.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Wow, I was learning much tonight. So thank you for sharing. And now, Julia and Jan, you are from Ukraine. And can you please share with us what are your thoughts, what you have heard, what are your thoughts about what's going on in Ukraine right now?
Well, it's lots of information from Bruce, actually, lots of stuff that I didn't know myself at all. So thank you very much. And as far as I know, my family comes from the part that is that is on the border with Russia. So we are from this part that we think that Bandera was not a good man, actually. And I think people do not know much about what's really is going on there. They just see the actual war that is taking place there, but so to speak, they are brainwashed. It's just the media that are there. They tell them what they want them to believe to,
Do you speak Ukrainian or Russian?
Russian. But my dad speaks Ukrainian, so it's really he's still on the Ukrainian part, but they are inclinating rather to the Ukrainian point of view, is about connecting to to West.
Can I ask you a question? In those Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, do the Russian-speaking people also speak Ukrainian, or do they not even understand Ukrainian?
No. We do understand Ukrainian, and when I was going to school, we used to have two languages, as like Russian and Ukrainian, and it wasn't like a foreign language; it was just parallel type of thing. And then so we do speak we can speak and we can understand the Ukrainian language, but we prefer not to use it. And when I was in Kiev, I wanted to buy some ticket, and I was ordering this ticket in Russian language. The lady was not really nice to me. She didn't want to hear Russian language there, so
yeah,
she didn't do that.
So I know that you have had your testimony here, but right now I cannot remember. Was it because it was so hard to live there that you escaped the country?
Well, basically, yes. It was my mom who moved over to the Czech Republic. It was because of the financial situation. She did have job, but didn't get money for that. So she met a group of people who was going for a year, to earn some money here in the Czech Republic, where we live now. And eventually, actually, we moved over here. So life is not really easy there, but I can see that West is really trying. It does affect people a lot. People are thinking that Western lifestyle is is the one that brings happiness, and it is sad to see that they are actually living their old lifestyle where they were more connected to the nature, and um, you know, but it was simple life. But it is hard life there.
Excuse me, can I ask you something else?
Sure.
Are you aware of what happened under Stalin when he starved the Ukrainian people, and about 6 million, I think it was 8 million actually, who died? Were you taught that in school?
I don't remember. I don't remember that at school. I left when I was 14. So maybe it was in the last year of the school, but I don't think so.
No, you know what amazes me? I'll give you another example. In the Second World War, the Croats murdered nearly 1 million Serbians in the most brutal way. Terrible atrocities, worse than the Germans. Worse, and most people in Serbia and Croatia, they've never heard of it. But it's true. And it amazes me how these things are kept secret and swept under the rug, you know. It's
yes.
And by the way, the Croats are Catholics, and the Serbs are Orthodox, and that's why they were doing it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes. As you say, these things are being swept under the rugs, really. Yes. I have learned about the Stalin thing here in the Czech Republic when I got baptized, actually, and we went to see some of the documentary about the Ukraine, and this is when I learned. I knew there was something, as you say, Galadomor, the starvation time, where when people were starving, and my grandma was also telling me these stories of them not being able to eat anything for quite a long time, and they had a cow and they had to sell. Well, it was the only thing they could have food from this cow, but then they had to sell the cow, and she also was starving, and my grandfather also was starving, but they weren't at this Stalin's.
Yeah, I'm sure you probably know that Ukraine has the best soil in the whole world. It has black soil, and sometimes it goes down 200 feet, and it's just amazing. It's an amazing breadbasket. It's so fertile that it could feed so many people. In fact, the soil is so good, they're actually digging it up and selling it. They're taking it overseas and selling it.
Wow. That's
what do you know, Bruce? Sorry, Julia, you were going to say something.
No problem. No, it's just another thing I didn't know about. No, not a big deal. No.
Yeah, Werner, I can see your hand is up.
Yes, I just like to confirm the thoughts of Bruce that the people are really squished in between East and West. And that also between peace and war, between light and darkness. I work, or I should say, in a neighboring community is a family who just came from the Ukraine to Norway. And in discussion with that family, I ask if they are aware of what is going on the eastern border of Ukraine. And they said, no, we haven't heard anything. And I didn't say anything. I thought, well, I wait for a while, and next time we discussed that, they said, we even checked with our friends in the East, and there was no reaction. So they only made this sign. But we're used to it. And so...
excuse me, are you saying they they dared not speak about it even in Norway.
They just, what they did say is, all we want is peace and not war. They didn't care if they're, if it's on the Russian side or if it's on the Western and the NATO side. They just want peace. And I do believe we, as Norwegians, as Americans who are listening today, Canadians perhaps, we have a responsibility to help the Ukrainians, but also our delegates and representatives in our government to understand that it is a power for war or peace, a power struggle. And that only can be solved by getting the power from God himself. And that must be the God of light and not the God of darkness. And that message is now so needed that people will know that God's power is not for one side or another. It is for life. It is for life eternal. So we must bring that message.
Amen.
Thank you, Werner. Tore, I want to ask you a question. How does this, if World War III should start in Ukraine, how does that fit into what you were talking about? We made a program yesterday for Light Channel where we talked about, that the Third World War is foretold should be between the Muslims and the Jews, right? How does all this fit together?
Well, I just quoted what the Freemasonry had planned.
Right.
But it is not sure it will go that way. They can change the strategic things if time develops other than they have planned for.
Right.
So, but it should. I think that the Third World War could be whatever we think it could be, because you never know, because the world is so easily mixed up both here and there, and we know that they're pushing for Iran a lot as well, and there you have this more big spiritual question, and I think that the most strategic place for the Antichrist to come forth is in Jerusalem.
Yes.
Because there all the religion meets. But it's not so very far from Ukraine to Iran. Iran is also on the border, one of the countries, isn't it, Bruce?
With Russia.
No, you said this big area.
Yeah. It's on the rimland, yes.
It's rimland, you call it, yes.
Yeah.
So it could easily be that. In my book, I lined up the countries that the powers will enter before World War III, and it was the last ones was Libya and Syria, and then at last Iran.
Yeah.
The last one thing hasn't come yet. So,
Can I say something?
Yes, you have a meeting.
Remember what the Pope said. He said that World War III is coming piecemeal, and
Yeah.
Ukraine may just be a piece which leads to the Middle East. And I also would like to say that Satan counterfeits everything that God does. So if God has a delineated system of prophecy, which we know about, then Satan is going to counterfeit it, and he's going to try and make his counterfeit come true. And his counterfeit is very much about the Middle East. It's all about Gog and Magog coming down there and fighting the Battle of Armageddon in Israel. And and Gog and Magog is supposed to be Russia. And so that's what most Christians believe. Actually, they believe this thing, and so Satan is going to do his utmost to make it happen. And if it does happen, we're going to have those people knocking on our doors, and they're going to say to us, "You silly Seventh-day Adventists, don't you see that our understanding of prophecy has come true and not yours?" That's going to be a bit of a test if it does happen that way.
Yeah, but we know that Satan, he will try as best as he can to copy Christ.
Yes.
So where Christ ascended from the earth, he wants to come down and show himself. So
yeah,
he's an antichrist or substitute for Christ.
Any more questions or comments? Nope. Well, then I just want to thank you so much, Bruce. And maybe Werner, would you like to have the closing prayer maybe?
Sure. Father in heaven, we thank you for helping us to understand the battle between good and evil. And we ourselves have our eyes opened, that we know the spirit you send into the world and the dark forces which are sent into the world. The battle, the great controversy. Father, help us to also recognize the prophecies which you have given in your word through your servants, that we can reread them, restudy them, and actually know at what point we are. And help us, Father, to bring your message. The time is fulfilled. Repent and believe the gospel. Help us to bring that to the people who Satan wants to destroy before they can accept that. We thank you, Father, for showing us how. Thank you for your power to actually go forward and do it. We thank you now that you bless each one who is studying and who is taking his part and doing his part wherever we are. We thank you for that and pray that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.